Firstly, I'd like to thank Swedenborg House and the Blake Society for organising this and for such amazing work they're doing. Thank you so much. And for everybody who's come along tonight and all of those that are attending online.
Okay. So we'll begin at the beginning then, Linda. You've been inspired by William Blake's work for a long time. What would you say was your first encounter with the work of William Blake?
I think the first encounter for many may have been the song Jerusalem, the hymn which we sang in school assemblies and which was very rousing, and I loved it very much. Didn't know who William Blake was, but I was very taken in by that song, by that hymn.
I've been thinking a bit recently about the painter Tom Phillips, who died November 22, I think. When he was at primary school, he discovered the word artist. And an artist, he learned, was somebody who didn't have to put his paints away. So he decided he was being an artist. When did you decide when you were an artist?
Well, I think I've always been one, but I blame it on the cows.
Yeah.
When I was born born in an ambulance. I found out very recently that the ambulance was surrounded by cows mooing while I was being born. So they literally sang me into the world. And cows are very sacred animals in many cultures, and also in the Norse mythology, they are part of the creation myth. And they do, they're a symbol of divine creative power. So I can't really say when I started to be an artist, but it was very early on. But I can tell you my first conscious memory of colour, and that was when I was locked out. We went to visit some relatives and they were living in flats and I was locked out, and I was 9 months old. I'd just learned to walk, and I walked along the walkway, and at every single door there was a small coloured caddy for 2 pints of milk, and everyone was a different bright plastic colour. And that's my first conscious memory of colour when I was 9 months old. My first conscious memory of drawing was when I was 5 and I was at school, and they asked us to illustrate the section of the book of Genesis, which was the part that includes that God said, "Let there be light." And we had these little exercise books with a clear area at the top and lines underneath. And that is my first recollection, though I'm sure I drew before that, of actually drawing when I was 5 years old.
So when did you first encounter Blake's visual work?
There was a friend of mine at Watford College who showed me a book with some Blake's in it. And it was around that time there was a big exhibition in the Blake Room at the Tate. So I went along to that quite a lot and bought the catalogue, which I later gave to my friend along with all of my other books and things when I went to study in London.
Yeah, I remember that 1978 Blake exhibition, quite marvellous. It made me a Blakean. I went several times, but then it was only 50p admission. God, those were the days. So you were traveling to the Tate from your home in Hertfordshire, or
yes.
Living? Yeah.
Yes, I was. Yes, and these are some of the drawings that I did in my teens, and they don't necessarily reflect Blake's depiction of the energies and states of his cosmology, but I do feel that they were inspired by Blake and the the one with the poem, it's more or less based on the meter of Kubla Khan, which we were studying at school, possibly before I did the drawing.
Yes. So, as I think Stephen pointed out, you've done now something like 50 books, mostly on
I believe it's more than 50.
Yeah, I had a count of my own collection and I've got 36.
That's interesting.
A lot of them, yes. What inspired you to make specifically book type of works about Blake? Well, why did they take a book form?
Well, I had a solo exhibition in Tavistock Square in London, and I was approached by Ron King of Circle Press to make a fine press book, and that was in the early 1990s. I said yes to the project because I'd often kept sketchbooks with words and images next to each other, so it seemed like a natural progression. I wanted to make a book of my own poems, but he suggested I make something by an already famous poet so that I could sell them. He hadn't read any of my poetry, so I wasn't too upset and agreed so that I could go forward with the project.
So you were a poet as well as a painter, engraver. Didn't you win a poetry prize?
Yes, I did in 2000. I won a Ford Poetry Prize.
So how did you move forward with your book projects?
Well, I thought of working on something from Blake's Songs of Innocence and Experience.
So why did you pick that?
Well, the poems resonated with my own background and connection to nature. We spent a lot of time running about in the woods as kids. I also lived next door to a school for part of my childhood. It was one of the infant and junior schools that I attended as a child. So the sound of children laughing and playing was what I woke up to every morning. And Blake's poems connected to my personal experience of that and to the experience of growing up surrounded by a lot of siblings and cousins.
So how did you find the process of making your idea into a book? And what are the obstacles and difficulties?
Well, the first suggestion I brought to the workshop was based on a Blake poem, Nurse's Song, but the person running the press thought it looked too complicated. The image you can see is one of the double pages of a mock-up. There were so many illustrations and type that I wanted to go here and there, and he suggested I make a more simple book. Looking at it now, I'd say it'd be pretty easy to print, but would have taken ages. They tend to. So there was this first book that was never made, and I do believe you have the sketches for that in your collection, Keri.
Yeah, I've got the paste up. It's very, very fragile.
I think that's because I was recommended to use a certain type of glue, which actually turned out not to be very good at all.
I think so.
Yeah. I think that was the first challenge, really, to find the right text and the right format. So there are some sketches that I did before that, as I was running through ideas in my mind to sort of try to find a direction to go with this. And let me just read a poem, Nurse's Song by William Blake, which I think is a lovely poem from Songs of Innocence. When the voices of children are heard on the green and laughing is heard on the hill, my heart is at rest within my breast and everything is still. Then come home, my children, the sun is gone down and the dews of night arise. Come, come, leave off play and let us away till the morning appears in the skies. No, no, let us play, for it is yet day and we cannot go to sleep. Besides, in the sky, the little birds fly and the hills are all covered with sheep. Well, well, go and play till the light fades away, and then go home to bed. The little ones leapt and shouted and laughed, and all the hills echoed.
Thanks, Linda.
So I came back with another idea. I had set type before at Watford School of Art for a poster I designed. That was some years before. I seemed to know where every letter could be found in the case. So set to work printing, as Ron, whose press it was, left for the day, he reminded me not to leave the roller in the down position on the press, as they cost a lot. I think it about £125 back then, which is a lot more now. However, on the way home, I was prompted by a spirit who told me I'd left the roller down. I didn't have keys to the workshop, so I called Ron to let him know. When I saw him the next day, he asked me how I knew I'd left the roller down. I said, oh, I'd just remembered. I think leaving the roller down was the second challenge, but it wasn't damaged. Let me just move on. So the book I actually did do is Spring. And this is one of the sketches. There were several sketches before it became this little book.
I think that's the first of your books.
That was my first, yes. That was my first book.
And the type is
it's handset, yes, yeah. Which I really love doing.
Yeah.
But I don't have space for cases and cases of lead types, so I worked in other ways, which we'll talk about later.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd like to read the poem Spring by William Blake. Sound the flute, now it's mute, bird's delight, day and night, nightingale in the dale, lark in sky, merrily, 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 to welcome in the year. Little boy full of joy, little girl sweet and small, cock does crow, so do you, merry voice, infant noise, merrily, merrily, to welcome in the year. Little lamb, here I am, come and lick my white neck, let me pull your soft wool, let me kiss your soft face, merrily, merrily, we welcome in the year.
Thanks.
I sent a copy of this book to Sister Wendy Beckett some years later, and she loved it. I met her on several occasions. I asked Ron if I could make another book, and he said no. He said, you have to sell those first, as a lot of people just keep them under the bed.
Did you? And what success do you have in selling them?
Well, I did sell. The Tate started selling them in their bookshop, and I also went around to various art schools and sold them to their libraries, and I found some other bookshops that would take them. So I went back to Ron and I told him I'd sold a load of them and would like to make another book. And he said, no. As far as I know, no one had asked to do more than one before, so I think that was a third challenge.
So that must have been rather frustrating, but you've gone on to make more and more books, more than 50.
Yes, I thought about it and I decided to start making them myself. So I bought a small etching press and adapted it. I made a type high frame and drilled the bed of the press, as you do with a brand new press, so that I could attach the frame to it, and I printed them on the etching press.
Did you do anything else for the Tate?
Yes, they asked me to produce something for Blake's show. They also asked if I thought it should be displayed inside the exhibition or outside. And I said outside, as the work itself was not made by William Blake's hand. It was eventually displayed above the entrance to the exhibition, another portal. I like this Blake quote from The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite. This is the wood engraving that was put in the book. These are also freestanding. You can see those behind there. And let me go back one there. This is the book, bookwork that was above the door of the William Blake exhibition, and I don't remember the year. Do you, Keri?
No.
Was it 2000?
Oh, no, it must have been, yes, yeah. 2000, yes.
The year on the piece is 2000, so...
Can you talk me through it?
Yes, I will, and I'll skip to another slide for that. In the centre, I've responded to lines from Blake and put them together with the so-called positive and negative aspects on opposite sides. So in the centre, I have loss bursting through a keyhole and the poem printed underneath with lots of tendrils and buds and things. And on the left side, I have the mind-forged manacles, which double up a bit here with binding with briars, their thoughts and desires. And the sick rose with the briars originating from inside her own mind. And the nurse from Songs of Experience looks on with envy. That's the green figure, which you may not quite be able to see there. At the joy of youth and taking off her mask, she points downward to indicate that she's going to pass through the doors of hell. Some institutions which Blake abhorred are described as prisons with a checkered path leading to and from, while the horses of instruction fall to the ground in a sprawling heap. On the other side of the book, there's a rescuing angel in gold light and the mystical child shepherd leading the way with his staff, connecting us to nature and spirit. The tigers of wrath are pouncing playfully, and children and spirits burst, nature spirits burst forth from buds. So that's that book. The cover image. Oops,
Nope.
Need to go back a bit there. Here we are. The cover image represents the hand of God giving us William Blake, with him already having the skill to sign his own name as an infant. But that's purely symbolic and not necessarily something that I know he did. Read the poem Infant Joy. When I can find it. Here it is. I have no name, but I am 2 days old. What shall I call thee? I happy am. Joy is my name. Sweet joy before thee. Pretty joy, sweet joy, but 2 days old. Sweet joy, I call thee. Thou dost smile, I sing the while. Sweet joy before thee.
Thanks. The books contain separate artwork, separate wood engravings, lino cuts. Do these exist as in their own right, or are they just limited edition in their own right, or are they always part of the book?
Yeah, some of them do exist in their own right, while others have remained entirely within the book's pages, and others I don't make for books. I was selling some tiny ones at Liberty in London many years ago, and through Duncan Campbell Fine Art Gallery, who was located in Thackeray Street, Kensington. These were not connected to the books at all. And Thackeray Street is only a few metres from where Samuel Palmer had once lived in Douro Place, Kensington. As you may know, Samuel Palmer was one of the ancients, a group of followers and supporters of Blake. William Blake occasionally wore glasses, and these came into Samuel Palmer's possession after William passed on, though I'm not sure what happened to them after that. I also met Brian Sewell, took him into the gallery. Do you know at all where the glasses are?
William Blake's glasses, a complete pair, are in the Fitzwilliam Museum. I don't know the route by which they came from Samuel Palmer to the Fitzwilliam Museum, but that's where they are. There's also half a pair of glasses that were found in Blake's cottage in the 1920s. Mm. So it's surprising what we have.
We've all got a half pair somewhere.
Yes. Will we ever find the matching half? Yeah. And Brian Sewell, extraordinary. Because he was very disparaging about women artists, but you managed to get round him.
Well, it was a fortuitous meeting. He was trying to avoid going to a gallery that he had to review, and I started talking to him, and he was absolutely charming and very complimentary about my work. I know that he had some notoriety about him, but he was an absolutely lovely person in person, and very, very nice. And the gallery were very happy that he'd gone in there, but
Yes.
he wasn't allowed to review that because that wasn't on his hit list.
Yeah.
Sadly.
Okay. Let's get back to printmaking.
Mhm.
Did you do a lot of printmaking before this, perhaps at Central?
I did a lot of printmaking at Central. I had some wonderful tutors there, but I wasn't sure I'd be able to remember the processes if I was let loose on a printmaking studio on my own. So I went to a lot of printmaking courses after Central. I studied plate lithography at Camden Arts Centre, etching at Morley, and a few other places. And I also completed a 6-month residency in stone lithography, and I really enjoyed that. And here I'm going to show you some lithographs that haven't actually been shown before, except the one with the lion that was shown one time in 1991. So these are from my private archive, and I'll just skip to those. And I might say as well that Brian Sewell did mention that he felt he could feel an atmosphere of Cecil Collins in my work.
Yeah.
And he was actually my personal tutor at Central. So, Brian knew what he was talking about. So these lithographs, again, very sort of family groups. And here again, the lion appears. I think my first lion appeared when I was 5 years old, and that was put up in the hallway at school because they were very impressed with it. It was multicolored. And you can see these at the back of the room. And these are children skipping around, again, very influenced by Blake. Another skipping girl. So I think these are inspired by family life and by Blake. And this engraving is a boy on a lamb.
Oh, yeah. Which is an image we find in Blake. It's one of the watercolors he did for Thomas Butts. It's not a biblical scene, but it's not uncommon in Catholic art. It's we've got the Christ child on the lamb, but the lamb also symbolizes his death, his sacrifice. And I think it's quite important because, as we know, Blake's mum was a member, at least briefly, of the Moravian Church, and the lamb is an incredibly important image to them. They sing hymns about the lamb. And if you go to the bottom of Muswell Hill, you'll see the Moravian Church house with a large sculpture, relief sculpture of the lamb on the wall. So, yeah, I think.
So I think this image is also from the catalogue that I bought in 1978. I did buy a second-hand copy of it because I'd given away my whole collection. And this obviously inspired me, though I'd seen it in 1978, it inspired me to produce the images of a boy on a lamb many years later.
So I think we've considered that. Did we move on to?
Yes. Also,
yes.
It relates to my events in my own childhood. We used to visit my great aunt who lived in SE17. That would have been about a mile from where the Blakes had once lived. And my great aunt had 2 dogs. One was a boxer dog, and they're very child friendly. And as babies, we used to literally ride him around the living room. So the idea of riding on an unusual animal, a sheep or a lamb, it was sort of there, And I'll read a poem in a moment about our move to Hertfordshire. That was when I was either very small or Yeah, I think actually it was before I was born, because I was born in Hertfordshire. I've used the word slum in my poem, but the houses were far from being slums. They were actually pretty brick houses, and my great aunt's house was kept in a very nice state indeed, with little doilies and everything everywhere. And the only drawback, I suppose, was that if you needed the toilet, you had to go to, it was a normal flushing toilet, but you had to walk down the back garden, and it could be quite dark. In some ways, that was good, because if you didn't like spiders, then you didn't see them. But I think that calling it a slum was possibly an excuse for developers to knock it down and build flats. But I'll read you a poem. From Blake's Lambeth, one could once see the vision of imagination stretched out, the tree-planted land, the chestnut earth of our fruitful England. From what is now Lambeth Walk, one could see the fields that became our Southwark, a ground once friend to the angels that held hands across the green to Peckham Rye. But the grandiose industrial machine ate its way into the green, the once exalted godly land of which a trace would not be found. An overcrowded, sprawling slum would take its place, where dark poverty oppressed the weak and hid its face. Little Lily Trout was never strong and lived with her sister at numbers 5 and 9 Olney Road, SE17, the once green fields of William's time. And soon she got married, became a mother between the wars, where poverty had bitten hard. One day she tried to feed her baby at the breast, despaired to see no milk in her was left. So she called to her sister with the one brown and one blue eye, chestnut earth and pale blue sky. She took the baby and warmed her by the fire, gave her whiskey and water instead. The child grew up and left the slums of London, fleeing to a green and pleasant land that was once called an overspilled town, where one could see the vision of imagination dancing free.
Next slide.
Yep, just a moment.
Yes.
Multitasking here. Would you like to say a bit about this slide?
This is, that was Blake's Apollo, isn't it? It's an image illustrating Milton's L'Allegro, the sun at his eastern gate. It's the great sun as Apollo, and probably also implying the appearance of Los, the poetic genius. Apollo has this strange scepter, which is called a thyrsus. Anthony Blunt illustrates an example from Herculaneum, which Blake would have found known in illustrated books of his day, of a figure holding this thyrsus, but it's also the same pose as Glad Day. So it's an image that lingers with Blake, that is part of his visual memory. The thyrsi in Herculaneum end in a pine cone, but here it's not a pine cone. Possibly it's a lotus bud.
Or an artichoke.
Or an artichoke, maybe indeed. Yes.
Which was also used, apparently.
Well, I think that's all I can say, really, about...
Not a very good artichoke, but maybe based on one loosely. So this image was also in the catalogue from 1978, because it seems a forerunner of Blake's Loss. Apollo, the deity of poetry, is carrying a scepter, which is something that appears in my work, though usually in a more natural form as a branch, a leaf, or a wand, so that it becomes a sign of connection to the cycles of nature and the mystical essence of things. Also, the swirling imagery in Blake's Apollo is something that's influenced my own work. Apollo is emerging from flames, which I would say denotes his fiery poetic imagination and spirit. Apollo was god of archery, music, dance, poetry, truth, prophecy, healing, diseases, the sun and light, and having the ability and strong presence and radiance that could ward off evil. Let me just move on to the next
Marvelous
slide.
image. Marvelous. Okay.
As you can see, it's one of my images with the, I would say, in my woman on a tiger, the flames of Apollo have become the stripes of the tiger, and therefore the chariot of fire. The woman holds a staff of wheat, which is symbolic of abundance and community, but it's also associated with the cycle of life and the body of Christ. The gloved hand represents purity and nobility, that one would probably feel quite noble riding on such an animal. And the crocuses on the ground are a reference to my early school. Inspired by tales of William and Catherine naked in a tree, I also have a lino cut on the same theme. I've heard they were found in the summer house, and some say they were found naked in the tree. Which is the accurate account, or were both true, Keri?
Well, Alexander Gilchrist, in his Blake biography of when 1863, has this story of a visitor finding William and Catherine naked in a summer house in their Lambeth garden, reading Milton. It's only Adam and Eve, you know. Now, the naked up a tree, as far as I'm aware, this comes from Jack Sheppard's play in Lambeth, which I remember seeing long time ago, probably at the Donmar, probably at the Donmar. But I think it's easier with the set to have a simple tree than try to decide, what a summer house in Lambeth in the 1790s would have looked like. And it would have taken up too much space on the stage. So I just think it's, artistic license.
Yeah, artistic license.
Oh, now move on to, excuse me. Yeah. Just thinking.
Oh, yes.
We're continuing with this theme of Catherine and William, because you recently wrote an essay about Catherine Blake for Temporal Boundary Press. This is it. This is the magazine with Linda's essay. So what inspired you to?
Well, I'd been thinking about it for a while, about Catherine's skill and her support of William's vision. I had in mind an essay and a performance, but the performance hasn't happened as yet. Aid and Andrew Dunn mentioned that Temporal Boundary were looking for essays on female visionary artists, so that prompted me to finish the piece. I've done various essays for people in the past, and I also write.
Yes.
Oh, I must up and make breakfast for my Kate, for she is without doubt an angel to me. From the moment she rises till we lay ourselves down to sleep beside each other, she is a balm to my despair and an enlivenment to my soul. I left her sleeping so soundly that I could put the kettle on and make her breakfast before her waking. All the day, she works so tirelessly at all things to do with the keeping of house. And so conscientious is she in every aspect of our work that I'm quite beyond myself to explain quite how she came to me. Surely there can be no other such as her that is like a compliment to myself in all things. Only an angel could know the answer, and an angel she must be.
Ah, William, to see you so bright this morning makes me filled with happiness. I thought for a moment when I heard you talking that you may have a vision upon you and needed me by your side. For when you are so taken, I'm afeard for you.
After breakfast, shall we go to our bower, and like innocent birds, be full of the cheer of day and of nature all around us?
I'd like that so, and perhaps there we'd make some merry tune.
I think that we shall, for I already hear one inside my ears.
And I too hear it, and a merry tune it is indeed.
I think we must have met at this exhibition at 17 South Moulton Street.
Ah, yes. Are you on the next page?
Yep.
Yeah. 6. Yes, I actually was approached by someone at William Blake's former residence in South Moulton Street to produce something for an exhibition. So it was to celebrate Blake's Songs of Innocence and Experience. I created a large book of 12 drawings called Woman on a Lion for that in 1994. And the book now resides in Longleat Library. That seems the right place for it. And as its connection to lions. And I'll show you some of the drawings. And I'll just read you a quote that my aunt used to read, not my great aunt, a different aunt. She used to read me this from the Bible. The wolf shall lie down with the lamb, the leopard shall lie down with the kid, the calf and the lion and the fatling together, and a little child shall lead them. And I think that's also influenced me. Here we've got, well, it's experience really being led by the child poet, the innocence of the poet. They can feel the heat of the sun, which is also Apollo. And of course, this one, you can read into it in different ways. The rose bush was a rose that was growing in our garden, and it was a dog rose, which is apparently, I believe, the original rose that all roses come from. And so I used to dream about that rose a lot. So I've included it in this image. And this is experience regaining innocence. I think you were going to ask me how I made it.
Yeah, sure. I think it's one of your first of your really large format books.
Yeah.
So say something about how you put that together, and that your later books are often quite large format.
Yeah. Well, I didn't know anything about the actual craft of bookbinding. I didn't think I did anyway. So I went to a course just to learn how to do it for this book. I left the course halfway through because I had enough information and skill by then. And I had no idea it was Sitting Guilds. Otherwise, I may have stayed on just to get the certificate. But I ended up helping quite a few people on the course with the knots, though I'd just learned them myself. The book is hardbound in cloth, and to achieve that, I bought some hardwood and drilled it, as you do, and held the book in there with some clamps and bolts and rounded and backed it with a hammer, as you do. It's cloth covered, and the oil painting is sitting in a slight recess in the cover board, and I really enjoyed making it. It's actually a book of 12 drawings, but I'm only showing you a few today.
Okay. There are, as we've already discussed, a lot of big cats in your work. So we can see some more.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think I always liked them as a child. I wanted a pet lion, and I was probably influenced by news, things I'd seen on TV. And you can't help noticing that Blake also had quite an obsession with them. So when I had an opportunity at school, secondary school, I chose big cats. That's not yet. That's another one from the big book. And that's a drawing that I did when I was 12, which I have a couple of. I don't have much of my early stuff, but I think then it was probably copied from a magazine or something. I had a lot of books on animals. And I think copying is part of learning when you're doing artistic work, and it's part of the way you learn how to control the medium. But I didn't know about different grade pencils at that time, so that would have been done with an HB. And this is an etching with added watercolor and gold leaf. That was based on a dream that I had. Whoops, I'm too far. This book it was actually inspired by writings of Clarissa Pinkola Estes about empowering oneself and transforming your life through dream work. And I call it a dreamscape. It's actually 8 foot long, and it starts off with the person falling asleep at the beginning and waking up at the end. And the woman transforms into a tiger in the center of the book. And this is another one of my lino cuts, quite influenced really by the swirly nature of some of Blake's images. And again, the child leading as a shepherd. It's leading us on a mystical journey.
Let's coming back to your methods and processes. How do you illustrate the book? Do you all, to what extent are they? They're not just they're never simple illustrations of what Blake is writing, are they? They're a response to what Blake is writing. And and also you're looking back at how the book's put together. You've now, I think, stopped hand setting type.
Well, I often set type on the computer and send it off to be made into a metal plate. And it sounds easy enough, but all the edges of the plate have to be filed down right up to the type. Otherwise, they'll show when it's printed. It's a bit of precision filing and takes ages. I also have to take several impressions in order to be sure there are no edges left. And I tend to work on very soft, fine paper. For the illustrations, at the start, I used wood engravings, but over the years, I've also made books with etchings, monotype prints, lino cuts, and a combination of these. I've also used cutouts, collage, sculpture, and pop-up folds, which is now called paper engineering. Some of the books also have embossed pages that have no ink applied. I felt this added a further dimension, especially to this one that was partly inspired by the Turin Shroud and Blake's poem, The Divine Image. It's a sense of something being there, but not quite being there at the same time, which raises it beyond the purely material.
You've also created several small, Divine Image is a favorite theme of yours, but you've also created several small books about Jerusalem. I mean, the hymn Under Those Feet.
Before we come to that, we have another interval for William Blake.
Never missed. Okay. I'm ahead of the. Yes.
I must be quiet lest I disturb him. When the spirits are upon him, I fear for his very soul. I can only sit and guard him and pray for his safe return.
Kate, I feel the spirit of loss entering through my left foot. The tremors rising. It is the great spirit of imagination. Oh, my heart. He bursts my heart open like a great sunflower. And there, There I see the emanations of those travelers, those not yet born, and those fallen, and those yet to be reborn. Oh, shade of my dear brother. Oh, he shows me how to print. Kate, we must make notes, lest I forget the details. There I see the glory of those colors on the pages, and together we shall make by our hands a new Jerusalem, filled with light.
He's back, safe and sound. My William, the things he sees and where he goes, it worries me at times. But he is back and will paint and draw all and set it to verse, that others can share it and know it too. You're asking me about Jerusalem.
Jerusalem, yes. If we move on to a number of, I'm not sure how many books you did.
I've lost count.
Yes, as always. I've got at least 3, maybe 4.
Yeah, that's one small one. That's the central page with the paper imitating light emanating. And yeah, and there's this one. I sometimes put small quirky things in, things that interest me, things that I'm interested in. Various things get put in. And whoops, gone a bit too much forward there. And on this is Jerusalem, and this is meant to be the staff that Joseph of Arimathea planted in the ground. And this relates to many of the staffs that you also see that my characters are carrying, because there's also the sort of sense of new life and mystery about them. And I've made various books that fold in different ways. And this one has a quote from The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, which is, "How do you know that every bird that cuts the airy way is an immense world of delight closed by your senses 5? The images inside the bird are Pooty unfurling the poem and 2 pilgrims going toward the dawn, enclosed in the stem of an imaginary Grail cup. This is a parachute book, which I did. Actually made to celebrate Felix Baumgartner's Leap from the Edge of Space. There's a labyrinth printed onto the parachute, which connects to transformation of the self with commitment to the task or quest. And the pilot is shown seated in the labyrinth, showing that this is his own personal journey. And this is me making sure the parachute works. And did it work when you tried it out?
Yes, it worked. It worked very well.
You need a good stairwell, really, to try these things. And I'm just going to read a poem from Blake. And this one was, it's in the Rossetti manuscripts, this poem. That's right, isn't it, Keri?
That's right, yeah.
This related to the parachute because when Felix Baumgartner was at the top about to jump, of course, there was a moment of hesitation because he knew that it was going to be life or death. But he took his faith into his hands and did the leap. You don't believe. You don't believe, I won't attempt to make ye. You are asleep, I won't attempt to wake ye. Sleep on, while in your pleasant dreams of reason you may drink of life's clear streams. Reason and Newton, they are quite two things. So for the swallow and the sparrow sings. Reason says miracle, Newton says doubt. Aye, that's the way to make all nature out. Doubt, and don't believe without experiment. That is the very thing that Jesus meant when he said, only believe, and try, and never mind the reason why. Now, Keri, would you like to read an extract from Blake's letter to Thomas Butts and talk a little bit about who Thomas Butts was, just for a second, because we're coming close to the end?
Yeah. Butts, I suppose, was Blake's most important patron for a long period of time. Butts purchased Bible paintings from Blake. Butts was a senior civil servant and actually rather well paid. So he was able to subsidize Blake with, I think, about £50 a year, which is quite a lot of money in the early 19th century. But what I want to say about Butts is that 20th century and even 21st century commentators on Blake like to think they're the first person who's ever understood what Blake is doing. But I think Blake and Butts were absolutely on the same wavelength. And I think this bears out in this extraordinary and wonderful letter. To my friend Butts I write, my first vision of light, on the yellow sand sitting, the sun was emitting his glorious beams. From heaven's high streams, over sea, over land, my eyes did expand into regions of air away from all care. Into regions of fire, remote from desire, the light of the morning, heaven's mountains adorning. In particles bright, the jewels of lights distinct shone and clear. Amazed and in fear, I each particle gazed, astonished, amazed, for each was a man, human formed, swift I ran, for they beckoned to me remote by the sea, saying each grain of sand, every stone on the land, each rock and each hill, each fountain and rill, each herb and each tree, mountain, hill, earth and sea, cloud, meteor and star, are men seen afar. I'll stop there. I think it's an absolutely wonderful bit of writing.
It is.
Okay.
Would you like to skip to there? Because I think we're, there. Yes. You've performed and so.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think because we're
Okay,
we've got to watch the time.
Yes.
While you're organising yourself, I was just going to say that I do believe that Blake tried to describe the indescribable, and that's possibly the nature of visions, and that when people try to categorise and interpret them, it could be quite difficult because the vision may be expressing something completely undefined and unknown.
Yeah, as we've already discovered, you've performed and sung works inspired by Blake and also set his poems to music. It reminds me that 10, 12 years ago, you did a little CD of The Divine Image, which I think is an important poem for you. Can you tell me how this came about?
Well, that's a good question. Some Blake followers, I believe it may have been the Blake congregation, asked me to come and perform a poem at the Tate, and I created one that I had to sing. I'd been performing my poetry all around London in various poetry cafes, events, had my poems on the buses. I had a little djembe drum that I'd bought, and suddenly I started to use it for poetry readings. Can't remember exactly when. I think a friend of mine, Shanks, invited me to play a drum at a poetry event. I only had to hit the drum in time, but I'd never done anything like that before. But I think that broke the ice for me doing the drum. So after the event at the Tate, Devitt asked me to do more, as did Stephen Mikulev, and my son also encouraged me. So I started writing more things. And music.
So how did the music come into it all of a sudden?
Well, there was a lot of music in the family from my father's side. So that's how music kind of always been there, a bit in the background. I had a band when I was in my teens, but the guitarist broke it up. So this is, I started writing songs again after that Blake poetry event at the Tate. And my son encouraged me. Hello, son. This is at Blake's window at St Mary's Church in Battersea, where we got together. I started a small group called Breakfast with the Blakes, and we went and performed some poems under the stained glass window. And we were also accompanied by a tiger moth that decided to flutter around. And that's me at Bunhill Fields. And I think you were there, weren't you,
Yep.
Keri?
Mm.
A maiden I met in Battersea, mild and demure, and so kind was she. Oh, as I wept beside a tree, will you declare your love for me? I asked her, do you pity me?
Yes, and sincerely.
She answered me, therefore I love you, I do decree.
And therefore I love you.
She said to me. Together we sang and danced, married so surely we were entranced. At the end of those years, my soul still free. You have ever been an angel to me.
Now we're together in paradise.
Heaven is blessed not once but twice. But are we together beneath a tree?
Or dancing here beside of thee. Thank you. Are we at the very last bit now?
Yep. Fine. So there you are, Linda.
There's a little bit more to come.
Yeah. No, yeah.
Oh.
I'm bleeding into.
Oh,
That's all right.
thank you.
Painter, printmaker, poet, musician, but you also write and direct plays.
Yes, I do.
Can you tell me about that came about?
Well, I think I did mention earlier that, but I think I may have missed it. When I was studying at Central, I actually did read a lot of plays, as well as reading a lot of Dostoevsky for some reason. And I really learned to write plays from reading lots and lots of Ibsen. And I had wanted to start a theatre company, but when I approached the business centre, they said no. So they said that we'll support books, but not written books, only handmade books, but we won't support theatre. So I did carry on doing the books, and then 10 years later, I met somebody who asked me, why don't you write a play? And I just needed that little bit of encouragement to do something, and I did. And then he suggested that I direct, and so I did, and I produced as well. So that's how it came about. I'd always wanted to actually do a bit in theatre when I was 5, but they made me a good fairy, and I wasn't too happy about that.
Are you going to write a play about Blake?
I've thought about it. Oh, there is
Yes.
more. I see.
Yeah.
It seems to have disappeared. A page seems to have disappeared there.
So this is America. One of my favorite books of yours. It's a wonderful book. So can you say a bit more about this one, how it's made, and the symbolism that you've added to it?
Well, I'm not sure really if images should be picked apart, but as I'd say, it's an inclusive vision. The clouds in some respects show that change is always inevitable. Changes take place and balance is being restored. Everything seems fixed, but there's movement and spiritual life going on. Clouds are ever changing and creating new shapes, maybe symbolizing a new age for society, prayer and communion with nature and spirit. Lions don't really belong there, but they are in Blake's America. For any Native American myths, you can really look those up, but there is a myth of the white buffalo woman, which is predicting the end of a cycle, but also that means a beginning of a new one. And as the buffalo itself is a sacred animal, so I've put these things in to that. But with different tribes, you'll have slightly different meanings to various things. So I encourage you to look into that a little. With the printing of the lino cuts, maybe it's from the impressions of seeing these brightly coloured milk caddies when I was 9 months old. I tend to like to print in one go, and I don't generally overprint, so that I will ink up with tiny rollers, and you're working against the clock before the ink's dry. And that's how I print them. And there's a lot of things you have to do when you're making a book, because you also have to fold, cut, glue, print on the cloth, the covers, not necessarily in that order. I've been adding ribbons, closures, and everything has to dry in between and be flattened. And then the end papers are hand printed and stenciled in about 5 or 6 different colours. And some also have gold leaf and watercolour included.
Gosh.
So this is the outfolded book. In the case upstairs, I've shown you a page which isn't actually glued into a book yet, rather than trying to fit the book in. And I've shown the closed book. And
so this is another of your large format books, and it's really monstrously difficult to print. How long does it take you to print them? And
impossible.
How do you create them?
Yeah, impossible to say how long. They always take much longer than you expect. So this one has 2 etchings attached as well that are based on Blake's own etchings, but I've added my own flora and fauna around, hedgehogs and things. And my actual maternal grandparents had a giant sunflower growing at the front of their house, and every time we went to visit, it was there, and it reached right up to the first floor window. And my grandfather was very tall as well, so it's just, you went there and you saw really tall things. It was really enormous. And I find sunflowers very interesting because they're plants that detoxify the soil, and they also can remove radioactive isotopes from the soil, but not all varieties do achieve that. So this is sort of I like the environmental theme as well, because I'm currently working on, one of the things I'm working on is sets of etchings on an environmental theme about ocean mammals. And I'm donating, every time I sell one of those, I'm donating some money to help conservation. So this book is made in a similar way to America, but on the cover there's gold leaf and collage, as well as printing on the cloth. And the sunflower end papers are hand stenciled. But I have to say that when I'm actually doing this sort of work, I have to be in a sort of meditative state to do it. Otherwise, the folds or the glue or something else won't work. It's a bit like Zen and the art of motorcycle maintenance, but with paper, ink, and glue.
Okay.
And the separate print is actually a lino cut with collage elements. And I don't think it reflects the sadness or melancholy of Blake's poem, but it celebrates the sunflower. So I'm happy with that.
What did you see?
As I lay awake and closed my eyes, I was transported to Felpham. There I did see the rolling country and the harmony of all nature, as he once saw it, and heard the sounds of birds as they played and delighted in the company of all natural things, and all was so merry. I saw him too, looking out across the fields, his heart being one and filled with light. He also shone like a great sun. The brightness burned through all of creation. It was a vision of a glad day. Now we have a little bit of time for some questions. We don't have very long.
Want to know as much as possible about being tutored under Cecil Collins and how he encouraged you to express that sense of joy. Is that right? Sense of joy in your work.
Well, I think that's a really wonderful question. Cecil employed various methods, and they may seem a bit unorthodox to some. One was actually painting with a blindfold on, and he would load up the paintbrushes and you then painted. And then after he was satisfied that you had created something, he would take off the blindfold and then say, now turn it into something. But also the blindfold painting, many suns appeared, and he said that this was a wonderful sign that there were suns in the painting. Another time he told me to go to the British Museum to see a Etruscan head, very small Etruscan head. And I said, oh, okay. And then he realized that he hadn't told me where. It's a very big place. And then he went, no, it's okay, you just go. And I went around, and I arrived in one room and I started drawing, and I thought, this just isn't right. So I went down the stairs and I followed Cecil's energy up the stairs and to the exact glass case where this tiny head was, and then drew there. And the head was of a female, and really having this, what he called the inner life, you know, the inner spiritual life. And she appeared to be with her eyes closed. But the Etruscan art, a lot of it, the women are smiling, and you don't really see that once you get to a certain stage in sculpture and things. And he had many methods. Another method he had was to play piano notes and ask me which colours I felt they were. And
synesthesia.
Yes, there's plenty of synesthesia going on. And Cecil was a really lovely person to be. When I first got him, I wasn't really too sure, you know, this man paints angels. I'm not really too sure about this because I was at Watford and they were German and Austrian people there teaching me, and I won't use the language that was used sometimes when they told you what to do to a drawing. But it was a really different approach. And Cecil was a very, you know, quiet person. He had fire, he had a lot of fire in him, but he was very, very quiet. He had the most beautiful hands that I've ever seen. I have to add that. Even if you see a photo of him, believe you me, his hands are extremely beautiful. And he told me as well, which is not always noted, that it was his mother that taught him to paint. And there are photographs of his mother with her paintings, but sadly the house was bombed during the war, and so her paintings went. But she taught him about the inner spiritual world. He was off school a lot, and within those times when he spent the time with her, she taught him how to see the spiritual side in the world. And he carried that with him. And I believe that he worked for 10 years without actually showing his work so that he could develop it. Being perhaps it would be too soon to show people certain works, maybe they weren't ready, a bit like Hilma af Klint. Maybe there wasn't the right time and he didn't feel that he had enough work, but eventually the work was out there. And, you know, it was very tiring for him doing the teaching as he got older, and he used to fall asleep in my workspace, which I was quite happy to let him do that, just doze off in the chair. And it turned out that he did have cancer and he passed away sort of quite soon after, you know, a year or two perhaps. Sorry, what was your question again? How did he help you to bring out the joy? I think really allowing you to work with a blindfold on, I think would be one of the ways. He was more of a guide. He wouldn't really tell you what to do. He was more of a guide and an inspiration, really, quite inspirational person. May I put this question to William himself? William, who told me that the roller had been left down?
It was I.
Thank you. I'd like to say thank you to everyone who came along here. I think we've really run out of time, but I can meet you after to ask if you want to ask a question. I'd like to say thank you to everybody that came along and showed an interest in this talk, in this Q&A, and all of the staff here who've done an absolutely fantastic job of putting this together. James, Wilson, Alex, and Ian, who's doing the tech, absolutely amazing tech, Stephen Pritchard from the Blake Society, and of course Keri for asking the questions, and of course William and Catherine Blake and Swedenborg, and the wonderful Simon Brandon. And I'd like to say tack så mycket för en helt magisk afton. Thank you for a very magical evening.